Respected Chair, Professor Russell D'Souza, Professor Joseph Thornton, Professor Mary Matthew, Professor Derek D'Souza, sir, and Dr. Shubham Gupta, and all the other participants. Wishing you all a very happy Doctors' Day, especially for doctors from India. Dr. Joseph Thornton had told in detail, like what are the different aspects of ethics. I've been asked to say why ethics is important. This question may have been asked to you by many people, why you chose medicine as a career, or you must have asked yourself this question. As far as I am concerned, I believe that this is one career where you get an opportunity to provide service to the society. And you also get an opportunity to provide charity. And in return, the society gives you a lot of love and respect. The financial gains in the profession may not be comparable to some of the other professions, but there is always an inherent stability, which isn't susceptible to the downfall as numerous other careers. Besides the love and respect and the financial stability, there's also a sense of satisfaction. And this is what each one of us aim to achieve in our lives. All this is possible only because medical profession works under a framework of high standards of medical ethics. The question, at least in India, is, are doctors traders or professionals? In our country, in India, this question has become more relevant than ever before, because an overwhelming majority of our doctors work in the private sector, where they work for profit, where they charge a fee for the service they render. People who fall ill and seek medical care end up paying money on the spot for the doctor's service, as they would have done when in a shop. Thus, buying medical care is a concrete, repeatedly experienced, unpleasant reality for a large majority of people. And people's common sense is formed from the reality of daily life interactions. The perception of people about doctors being traders, therefore, flows from this daily experience of cash transactions and fee for service. In fact, in India, the medical profession has been brought under the Consumer Protection Act. And the Honorable Supreme Court says that patients are consumers and doctors are service providers. But on the other hand, doctors believe that through the education and training, and more so through the historical tradition, that they have been taught to believe that they are genuine professionals working for the well-being of the patients and not for trade. It is this teaching and tradition, in addition to the reality of dealing with life and death of patients, that have kept the doctor's self-image as professionals alive. This self-image also brings in the question of ethics in medical care. For a professional without ethics would be considered a trader. Now, we say that we are professionals, or what is the characteristic of a profession? The profession is, you say that you are a professional because a profession means that you have to undergo a structured training and orientation program. On completion of this program, there is an end certification or a recognized qualification. This qualification has to be registered. And for this, there should be a registering authority which grants and maintains the register of such registrations of this duly qualified and certified individuals. Such registered individuals are conferred with certain rights or privileges to practice their profession. This medical profession is required to adhere to certain ethical guidelines or ethical values which are prescribed and or codified by this statutory registering body. And for a period of time, it is actually this, and this comes upon expiry of this period, they may have to renew their license, and they're subject to certain conditions. At the same time, these registering authorities is vested with a statutory jurisdiction to try the breaches by the registered medical practitioners. It could be in the form of medical negligence, it could be in the form of misconduct, it could be in the form of ethical breaches, for which these registering authority has the power to award requisite penalty, if any, in accordance with the principles of natural justice. So then what is medical ethics? Medical ethics is a system of moral principles that apply values and judgment to the practice of medicine. And these principles lay down proper professional conduct regarding the rights and duties of the physician, patients, and fellow practitioners, as well as physicians' actions in the care of the patient and in relation with their families. So coming to the principles of medical ethics, I think already Dr. Joseph Thornton has told you about the 4 pillars of medical ethics, that is autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. However, probably the practice of medicine has a special characteristic not found so pronounced in any other occupation, because doctors deal directly with patients at a time when the person is most vulnerable, with an immediate issue of life and death, health and illness. The patient is heavily dependent upon the technical knowledge and the integrity of the doctor. And the doctor thus has a unique involvement with the patient, but this doctor-patient relationship is not balanced. The patient's attitude is a complex of trust, which comes from the perceived competence of and integrity of the doctor, and paradoxically from distrust, which comes from the state of uncertainty and vulnerability. I think I'll just explain to you in a much simplified way. Suppose a person brings his father with a stroke, and the consultant says that you've got to do an MRI. You know that there are allegations that doctors take cuts and commissions. But then if the patient, the patient believes that this is for the best interest of the patient, and he was willing to do. But at the same time, if he has in the back of his mind that this is being done for the cuts and commission, then that relationship, or that there is a mistrust, or there is a breakdown of the doctor-patient relationship. Another example could be a person has brought his mother who had an acute MI, and the doctor, after investigation, says that you have to thrombolize this patient, and he or she prescribes injection tenecteplase, which is a thrombolytic drug used in these myocardial infarctions. And in India, it costs nearly 50,000. Here again, even though the doctor has told in reality, or the best interest of the patient in mind, there are sometimes the person feels that it could be as an obligation to the pharma industry, which has sponsored many of his foreign tours. So thus the doctor-patient relationship, which is based mainly on trust, gets broken down. So that is where ethics come into play. This ambivalence in this doctor-patient relationship is addressed by medical ethics, which tries to guarantee the patient that the doctor will not abuse his dominance in this relationship. Thus, medical ethics is essentially a regulatory mechanism that makes the doctor commit publicly that though medical practice is the source of his living, he will strive to the utmost for the benefit of the patient and not be driven just for merely personal gain. And what is the need for medical ethics? As I said, medical ethics is a self-regulatory mechanism, and this self-regulatory mechanism is the strongest in medical profession. I think, as personally, I feel if there is any other profession, which perhaps could boast of a more autonomy and greater self-regulation, I think are those who deal with theology or those who do work on of religion. So self-regulation means a voluntary internal regulatory mechanism within the profession, irrespective of whether such controls are demanded by law or others outside the profession. So this concept can be traced to ancient times. In India, it was the Srikumar and the Charaka. In Greece, it was the Hippocrates. And there were many other sages in various parts of the world, who had brought in various regulations. And there are oaths in their name. And the extremely high standards which are set prompted the acceptance of these oaths by the subsequent generations. And today, even today, many of these moral codes are used, or these oaths are introduced, where during the initiation of the neophytes into the profession, and for self-regulation by medical practitioners. The high standard laid on by these codes of conduct has been responsible for maintaining the sanctity of the medical profession and help us to claim that doctors are professionals and not traders. So the need for ethics is because it promotes medical standard. There is a promotion of value of trust, accountability, and mutual respect in medical care. There's a building public support for medical care. You earn respect for the medical profession, and above all, promotion of the important moral and social values such as human rights and social welfare. So as I said that, with ethics, the practice of medicine as a profession gives us a lot of autonomy. This autonomy provides us with greater flexibility in our work. It allows us, improvisation and innovations, without which, the science and art of medicine cannot progress. It also gives us the authority to determine reasonable standard of practice based on acceptable scientific practice at any given period. However, as Dr. Joseph Thornton had said, this is a double-edged sword. This autonomy is a double-edged sword. The monopoly of medical practice can allow, and has in fact permitted many members of the profession to deviate from its social obligations. And also, the monopoly over medical education is so much so that people have the number of doctors coming out is very less. It's not enough for the society. And autonomy can and has led to more power to doctors in relation to patients, and very often there have been abuse of such powers. There is ethics when we talk about ethics. Ethics is not black and white. It's not. There are areas of gray zone. Gray areas are there. Because that is what we call as ethical dilemmas. Because things may be legally right, because laws differ from country to country. So that when it is legally right and ethically correct, then there's no problem. Again, when it is legally wrong and ethically wrong, there is no problem. The problem comes when something is legally correct but ethically wrong. So the dilemma comes there. And when it is legally wrong and ethically correct. So these are the dilemmas which develop, and this is where bioethics and ethics got a very important role. So ethics versus laws. See, medical ethics and law are not the same, but often they help to define each other. Breach of ethical obligations may not necessarily mean breach of law. Breach of ethical obligation are often used to prove medical malpractice or negligence. Coming to medical negligence, it's usually, the medical negligence are dealt by civil laws like the tort and the contractual liabilities in most countries. In several countries, it also comes under the Criminal Act, under their country's penal code. Unfortunately, in India, medical negligence have been brought under the Consumer Protection Act in 1986. And no one appreciates this interference of the law and courts in their profession. Because we believe that medical profession means public service. We believe that it is not trade or an industry. We believe that profession means there is a code of ethics which is inbuilt into it. We believe that profession is self-governed or self-regulated. Then why law, why courts, and why police? So the doctors always have a conflict of thought with the legal system. This is because initially doctors were equated with God. It was felt that God can never go wrong, and hence there was no need for such laws. But as time went by, there has been a devaluation in the principles of those practicing this noble profession, resulting in various regulations being brought in for the conduct of this profession. However, the reference point of writing the code of ethics is basic human rights, which can never be altered or violated. It is this rights-based approach which has come to regulate even medical or other professional conduct. What we should remember, this transition is significant. And if the profession does not take note of this transition, doctors will be treated like any other citizen. They will lose their privileges, which they now enjoy in society. And the responsibility is squarely on the professional bodies. If we do not take action now, and if we do not take this deliberation to an actionable point, we will create a situation in which Parliament or other legislative bodies will be compelled to treat doctors like any other citizen, which will be suicidal for both this profession and the patient and society. This crisis has been developing because of the technological development, the corporatization, the commercialization of our profession, the commodification of human bodies, because of the greed and competition, which is becoming the order of the day. So it is very important that there is a strict implementation of code of ethics, which is the only answer. The best example, which you can see, is the informed consent involving research and clinical trials. This gives protection to those involved in the research to see that they are not exploited. Many risks are involved, but at the same time, following this research and clinical trials, we get a lot of benefits. However, the human rights of those individuals undergoing these research activities or clinical trials should not be violated. Frankly speaking, if doctors who are doing this research would have been ethical, these informed consent would not have been required. It is only because of the irresponsible behavior of some doctors that such regulations have been brought in. So as we all know, there is professional organizations which, as I mentioned, the irresponsible autonomy, which make it mandatory that professional groups prove their responsibility by strict self-regulation and disciplinary action against erring members. They must show the society that the freedom and latitude awarded to them are not misused. Just saying that we are self-regulatory is not sufficient. But we have to show that this self-regulatory mechanism has sufficient transparency before they gain any credibility in the public eye. So we have various medical councils. These medical councils have the responsibility of penalizing those doctors who do unethical activities. So how can ethics be preserved? One is the value-based education. When we talk about value-based education, it is not merely teaching ethics to those MBBS students or MBBS doctors. I think this value-based education should start from school level. It should be inculcated at a very young age. The way we can ethics can be preserved is by our seniors, our peers, and teachers. See, teachers should be the ideal. Very often the students learn not only the scientific aspect, but also the behavioral aspect, which is very important in day-to-day practice. So the teachers have got a huge responsibility to inculcate this sense of ethics among their students. Professional organizations like the WMA, the World Medical Association, the Indian Medical Association, the Australian Medical Association, the American Medical Association, the British Medical Association, all of them have got a very important role in evolving the various ethical code of conduct. And the regulatory bodies, like the national, in India, we have the regulatory bodies like the National Medical Commission and the State Medical Council, which should be a watchdog on those who are erring, or they are the person who, should be ensuring that ethics is being followed. But last but not the least, is there should be adequate remuneration, because it's often felt that it is this reason why, when they are not adequately compensated for the hard work they do, that they indulge in such unethical practices. So what is medical etiquette? Medical etiquette, you know that knowledge creates conflict and conflict creates war. And the medical etiquette is a set of moral principles which guide the medical professionals in their dealing with each other with mutual respect, understanding, and camaraderie. Medical ethics means morals in medical practice. Medical etiquette means manners of medical practice. And ethical code of conduct is a combination of medical ethics and medical etiquette. And the deterioration of medical ethics is due to the 3 C's, that is the competition, the commercialization, and the corporatization of medical profession. I'll just go through this, as already said, this ethics is one of the most dynamic things. It's never static. It has been changing with time because of the various technological advancements, the development in science, and the change in attitude and behavior of the society. The oldest code of ethics in India was the pre-Vedic period, Siddha text. Then we had the Charaka Samhita. Later we had the Hammurabi code of ethics, and Hippocratic oath of ethics came in the 5th century. Now we use a modified version, and the first human research was in 76, but at that time there was no ethical guidelines, and it was John Gregory who brought in the lectures and duties and qualification of a physician, and it was the English physician who wrote the first modern code of ethics. That is Percival's medical ethics was used the key source of the American Medical Association's code, which was adopted in May 1847, and it was Claude Bernard who introduced the study of experimental medicine. He insisted that all human experiments should be preceded by animal experiments. And in the 1990, the US Army yellow fever research was the first systemic use of informed consent and protection of subjects in the research. And the World War II Holocaust, which saw doctors misusing their powers, the deplorable, inhuman attitude of some of the doctors were responsible for a real Holocaust, and the way they treated the prisoners of war, the freezing experiments, the poisonous gases on even children led to the American Military Tribunal in December 1946 and the Nuremberg doctors' trial, the famous doctors' trial, and resulted in the evolution of the Nuremberg Code and informed consent in 1947. And then the World Medical Association came into existence, and it first adopted at Helsinki in 1964 the ethical principles on research involving humans. During all this time, we had the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study, which, when penicillin was available, it was not being used. And finally, in 1997, the President Bill Clinton apologized and gave a compensation of $9 billion. And there was a US syphilis study in Guatemala as late as 1946 to 48. And then finally, the Belmont report came up, where ethical principles and guidelines for the protection of human subjects of research came into existence. And then, as already mentioned, the UNESCO Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights was adopted on the 19th of October 2005, where during the 33rd session of the General Conference of UNESCO, where a set of bioethical principles were agreed upon by the 191 member states of UNESCO on a common global platform to promote, disseminate, and elaborate bioethic principles for the practical purposes. There are several articles, I'm not going into it because of paucity of time. And to conclude, I must say that let us treat patients with respect for their rights, give them accepted evidence-based treatment, standard, compassionate care, and above all, take them in confidence as partners in care of their health. Thank you. Stay strong, stay safe.